you ever imagined what you would do if, while in mid-flight, you encountered something that defied all logic and science? I never thought I'd experience it, but it happened to me. My name is Henrique, and I've been a commercial airline captain for over 20 years. I've faced storms, technical failures, and medical emergencies, but nothing compares to what I went through on that flight. Today, I'm going to share with you the most terrifying and inexplicable experience of my career. It was an ordinary day, with the sun setting on the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange. I was in the cockpit of my Boeing 737, doing the final preparations before takeoff. The passengers were already seated, and my crew was ready for another journey. I checked the instruments, chatted with the co-pilot, and everything seemed absolutely normal. The takeoff was smooth with no issues. The aircraft climbed into the sky, slicing through the clouds as the sun disappeared. We were on our way to a routine destination, a route I had flown countless times before. Everything was going as planned until something unusual caught my attention during the cruise phase. The instrument panel, which normally stayed lit steadily, began to flicker irregularly. At first, I thought it might be a common technical glitch, something I could easily fix. However, as the flickering persisted, a sense of unease began to take hold. What initially seemed like a minor technical problem started to turn into something more enigmatic. The lights on the panel weren't flickering randomly. There was a peculiar pattern in the way they were turning on and off. It was as if the aircraft itself was trying to communicate something, a message that couldn't be ignored. My heart began to race, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched the panel more closely. What had seemed like a manageable situation was now sparking curiosity, mixed with apprehension. As I tried to understand what was happening, the intensity of the moment became increasingly palpable. The flickering lights seemed almost alive, like a code, a language that I didn't fully understand but was meant to reveal something important. The uncertainty of what that meant began to weigh heavily on my mind, creating a growing tension within the cockpit. I knew something was about to happen, but the nature of this event remained a mystery. It was at this precise moment that the surroundings began to change drastically. The cabin lights, which had been steady, started to flicker irregularly, plunging the environment into an unsettling game of shadows and flashes. At the same time, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, as if we were being enveloped by an inexplicable wave of cold. The air inside the cabin turned icy to the point where I could see my own breath turn into small clouds of vapor floating in the confined space. The discomforting sensation was quickly replaced by a growing dread when, amidst the chilling silence, a soft, distant voice began to echo through the aircraft's communication system. The sound was subtle, but carried a strange resonance that immediately made me realize something was terribly wrong. What made the situation even more disturbing was the realization that the voice did not belong to any member of the crew. It was as though it came from somewhere else, a place beyond my understanding, and one I couldn't identify, creating a sense of isolation and mystery that enveloped me completely. As I listened to the unfamiliar voice, a sense of disorientation began to take over. The normality of the flight had been shattered by something I couldn't explain, something that seemed to transcend the boundaries of reality and the known. With each whispered word through the communications system, I felt the weight of the unknown intensify, as if an invisible presence was trying to manifest in that space. The combination of the flickering lights, the biting cold, and the enigmatic voice created an atmosphere of suffocating tension, and I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. My mind was racing, desperately seeking a logical explanation for what was happening, but fear began to infiltrate every thought. The environment around me seemed to transform into a nightmarish scene as the panel lights, once controlled and predictable, started to flicker erratically, casting disordered flashes that heightened the tension in the air. The sudden jolt of the aircraft felt like a direct blow to my composure, and the sensation that something was terribly wrong intensified with each passing second. However, the most disturbing part was that there was no technical indication of a problem. All systems appeared to be functioning normally. As the aircraft shook beneath me, an internal struggle began to unfold. I was trying with all my might to maintain control, both of the aircraft and my emotions, but the sensation that something far beyond my comprehension was taking over the situation was undeniable. The normality had been ripped from me, replaced by a growing conviction that not only was technology or nature interfering with the flight, but an unknown and invisible force was involved. This perception, though not backed by any technical data, began to take root in my mind, creating an atmosphere of fear and disorientation. Each second felt like an eternity as the sense of dread grew. I knew I needed to make a decision, but what lay before me was a mystery that defied any logic or knowledge I possessed. The feeling of helplessness was increasing, and the idea that perhaps something else was controlling the aircraft, a force I could neither identify nor combat, became more real. At that moment, it was not just the integrity of the aircraft at stake, but also my sanity, as fear threatened to overwhelm me completely. During the cruise phase, when the flight was supposed to be proceeding smoothly, something unusual began to catch my attention. The instrument panel, normally reliable and steady, began to flicker in a way I had never seen before. Initially, I attributed it to a simple technical glitch, something routine that I could easily fix without major concerns. However, as I looked closer, I realized that it was not a simple anomaly. The pattern of the flickering lights was not random. There was a specific rhythm that seemed to defy any logical explanation. It was almost as if the panel itself was trying to communicate with me, sending a coded message that I couldn't decipher. This unusual behavior of the system, something that had never occurred before, sent a shiver down my spine, alerting me that there was something more profound at play. The growing sense of foreboding began to settle in, but what exactly was about to unfold remained a mystery. Despite the initial discomfort, I was trying to stay calm and clear-headed, but the environment around me seemed charged with a tension that hadn't been there before. The apparent attempt at communication from the panel, combined with my increasing anxiety, made me realize that I was facing something that transcended a simple, technical failure. The unknown was subtly insinuating itself, but it was undeniable, leaving me with a sense that the next moments would reveal something that could change everything. It was at that moment that everything seemed to collapse, as if an invisible force had decided to alter the course of events abruptly. The cabin lights, which had been steady, started to flicker chaotically, plunging the environment into an intermittent darkness that amplified the sense of chaos. Simultaneously, a sudden drop in temperature turned the cabin into a freezing chamber, so intense that I could see my own breath condensing in the air, forming clouds of vapor that hovered in front of me. It was as if the very environment was reacting to an unknown presence, a change that manifested in a disturbing and alarming way. At the peak of this growing discomfort, as I struggled to process what was happening, a soft, distant voice began to be heard through the aircraft's communication system. At first, I thought it was some sort of interference, but the voice persisted, whispering words that I couldn't fully understand, but that carried a sense of urgency and mystery. The most disturbing detail? That voice did not belong to any member of the crew, something I instinctively knew by not recognizing any familiar tones. It was as if it came from a different place, an origin that escaped my understanding and did not belong to the context in which I found myself, creating an atmosphere of heightened tension and isolation. The feeling of isolation was immediately heightened by the impossibility of identifying the source of that voice. I was surrounded by technology, but this mysterious communication seemed to come from a place that transcended the physical confines of the aircraft. The growing unease, combined with a fear I could not control, created a suffocating atmosphere. Not knowing where the voice was coming from or what it meant created an unbearable tension, as if something far beyond my understanding was closing in, ready to reveal itself. My mind was racing in a desperate search for answers, trying to find some logical explanation to ease the chaos unfolding before me. As I sought any rational reasoning to calm my nerves, a rising wave of fear began to infiltrate my thoughts, undermining my ability to stay composed. The flickering lights on the panel, once a source of control and security, began to flash erratically, as if taken over by a force I couldn't comprehend. At the same time, the aircraft began to shake frighteningly, intensifying the sense that something was terribly wrong. Despite the gravity of the situation, there were no technical indications that could justify what was happening. All systems seemed to be functioning normally, without alarms or signs of failure that could explain the anomalous behavior of the aircraft. This only heightened my unease, as I knew something far beyond normal parameters was interfering with the flight. I clung to every shred of control I had left, struggling to avoid succumbing to the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. However, the growing sense that an invisible presence, something beyond my understanding, was taking over the aircraft was undeniable and impossible to ignore. Every jolt of the aircraft, every flicker of the panel lights, seemed to reinforce the idea that things were beyond my control. The connection between what I saw and what I felt became increasingly tenuous, as if I was being confronted with forces that transcended logic and reason. The sense of helplessness mixed with fear, creating a mental environment of high tension. As I fought to maintain the stability of the flight, an inner voice whispered that something more was at play, something beyond the reality I knew. It was a silent battle between trying to maintain sanity and accepting that the inexplicable had invaded my control space, leaving me at the mercy of a mystery I had no way to resolve. It was then that I looked outside and saw it. Amidst the clouds, a vague and distorted figure. It seemed to be watching me, floating alongside the aircraft. My heart raced. I knew what I was seeing was not normal, was not possible. It was something beyond a human comprehension. The figure moved in parallel to the plane, almost as if guiding it, and then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. Suddenly, everything stopped. The light stabilized, the temperature returned to normal, and the shaking ceased. It was as if nothing had happened. I checked the instruments again, and everything was perfectly within standard parameters. The rest of the flight was smooth, without further incidents. But I knew that what had happened could not be explained by anything I had ever learned. To this day, I cannot fully understand what occurred on that flight. Was it real? Was it an hallucination? I don't know. But what I do know is that since that day, I have never been the same. Every pilot faces challenges, but what I experienced on that flight was beyond any challenge. It was an encounter with the unknown, and I will never forget it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more accounts like this, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video. And remember, no matter how hard we try to control everything, there are things beyond our understanding.